Along with shutter speed, another important element that will affect your exposure is the size of the aperture opening. The aperture acts much like the iris of the human eye, opening and closing to allow different amounts of light through. The size of the aperture opening is referred to as the f-stop. A lower f-stop value refers to a larger opening, and a higher f-stop value refers to a smaller opening. So an f-stop of 2 is a larger opening than an f-stop of 22. In addition to affecting the amount of light that reaches the sensor, the aperture opening also affects your depth of field. Have you ever noticed how the subject of a professional portrait pops right off the page? This is because they are in focus, while what's behind them is not. This is achieved by using a shallow depth of field. Depth of field is the range of distance from the focal point of the lens in which an object will stay in focus. In other words, if the lens is focused on a subject and he moves closer or farther away from the camera, at some point he goes out of focus. With a shallow depth of field, he'll go out of focus quickly. The range of distance in which he stays in focus is small. With a greater depth of field, he'll stay in focus longer. The range of distance in which he'll stay in focus is greater. Portrait photography utilizes shallow depths of field in order to blur the foreground and background and direct the viewer's eye to the subject, the one thing that's in focus. When you want everything in the frame to be in focus, you want a greater depth of field. This is achieved by closing down the aperture to a higher f-stop value. Greater depths of field are useful in many situations, such as group portraits, landscapes, and documentary photography. A note about compensating for exposure when using aperture to achieve a specific depth of field. It's important to understand that in addition to affecting your depth of field, the aperture opening is also affecting the amount of light that hits the sensor. Opening up the aperture to get a shallow depth of field may result in too much light hitting the sensor, which gives you a picture that's overexposed. Photographers compensate for this by using faster shutter speeds, which reduce the amount of light that hits the sensor, or lower ISO values, which reduce the sensor's sensitivity to light.